Have you ever wondered why so many Buddhist teachings keep returning to compassion, as if it were the main road and not a side path? Have you ever asked yourself how a practice that feels so personal could be rooted in centuries of human struggle and wisdom? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to travel through time without leaving our breath. We are going to trace the living history of Buddhist compassion meditation, not as a museum tour, not as a stack of dates, but as a story of real people trying to meet suffering without becoming cruel, trying to heal pain without turning numb, trying to live with a heart that stays human. There are two main ideas I want to keep close as we move. The first is that compassion meditation did not appear as a trendy wellness tool. It grew because suffering is universal, and the human mind easily turns suffering into more suffering through hatred, shame, and fear. Compassion practice is a response to that pattern. The second idea is that the history of compassion meditation is not only the history of Buddhist cultures, it is also the history of an inner skill evolving in countless hearts. When you practice compassion, you are not only doing something for yourself, you are stepping into a stream that has carried people through grief, conflict, injustice, and ordinary exhaustion for a very long time. That stream is karma in motion, not as superstition, but as the momentum of what human beings repeatedly choose to cultivate. Let me begin with a person who did not think history mattered. There was someone named Mira who loved practical answers. Mira was the type of person who wanted the point immediately. If a teacher started talking about ancient India, Mira would quietly tune out. Mira would think, I am trying to survive modern life, not memorize the past. Mira believed that compassion meditation was just a modern technique, like stretching for the mind. Breathe, say a few kind phrases, feel better, move on. Then life made Mira curious in a deeper way. Mira had been doing a short loving-kindness practice each morning. Some days it felt soothing, some days it felt fake, and then there were days when it felt completely impossible. Days when Mira was angry, days when Mira felt betrayed, days when Mira felt lonely and ashamed, days when kindness sounded like a joke. Mira began to wonder, if compassion is so central in Buddhism, why does it feel so hard sometimes? Why do I resist it? Why does my mind prefer judging and blaming, even when I know it hurts me? A friend suggested a talk by a Dharma teacher who focused on history. Mira almost refused. Then Mira heard a sentence that hooked the mind. The teacher said, compassion meditation is not one practice. It is a family of practices that evolved as Buddhism moved through different lands, languages, and human needs. The core remained, but the expressions adapted. If you understand that, you stopped reading compassion as a single trick that either works or fails. You begin to see it as a living path, and you can find the doorway that fits your nervous system. Mira leaned in. That night Mira sat with a notebook and began listening. But instead of writing dates, Mira wrote question. What problem was compassion practice trying to solve? What kind of mind did it aim to cultivate? How did people practice when they had no apps, no playlists, no modern therapy language? As Mira listened, a story began to form, and it felt less like history class and more like a map of the human heart. Long ago, in the early Buddhist world, people were wrestling with the same basic challenges we wrestle with now. They experienced loss, illness, conflict, social tension, and the constant pressure of desire and fear. The early teachings did not pretend life was always pleasant. They started with honesty about suffering, but they also offered a radical claim. Suffering has causes, and because it has causes, it can be reduced. The path was not built on wishful thinking. It was built on training. In that early context, compassion and loving kindness were not presented as soft decoration. They were presented as powerful mental qualities that protect the mind from hatred and cruelty. If you want to understand why compassion meditation became essential, you have to understand how dangerous hatred is to a human mind. Hatred feels like strength for a moment, but it burns the person holding it. It creates restless sleep. It creates sharp speech. It creates broken relationships. It creates regret. Regret becomes long suffering. So early teachings emphasized an alternative. Train the mind in friendliness. Train the mind in compassion. Train the mind in the ability to wish well. This training was not naive. It was strategic, because it was aimed at the root causes of suffering in the mind. Mira noticed something. The teacher kept repeating that compassion practice is a form of protection. Not protection from life, but protection from becoming poisoned by life. That changed how Mira heard the practice. Kindness was not a performance. Kindness was medicine. The early Buddhist traditions often spoke of the divine abodes, the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Mira had heard these words before but never felt their weight. Now Mira imagined an early practitioner sitting near a village that had just lost people to illness, or sitting near a conflict between families, or sitting with grief after death. In such a world, a mind that clung to hatred would become a prison. So the practice was to build an inner dwelling, a place in the heart that was spacious enough to hold pain without turning it into cruelty. Mira realized that the phrase divine abodes was not poetic fluff. It was a declaration that you can live in a different inner world, even when the outer world is harsh. But how did they practice? The teacher described something that sounded very close to what people do now, though it was carried with a different seriousness. Practitioners would cultivate loving kindness by repeating intentions and widening the circle of care. They would begin with themselves, not because the self is the most important, but because the mind needs a stable base. If you cannot wish yourself well, your goodwill toward others becomes fragile. Then they would extend goodwill to a benefactor, a friend, a neutral person, and eventually a difficult person. Not the most traumatic person at first, but a mildly difficult person, because the heart learns best when it is not flooded. Mira felt relieved. So it was normal that some people were too difficult at first. The tradition itself respected the nervous system. Then the teacher spoke about compassion, not just loving kindness. Loving kindness is the wish for well-being. Compassion is the response to suffering with the wish to relieve it. In early teachings, compassion is not only an emotion. It is a mental orientation that changes how you see other people. Instead of seeing enemies, you see beings caught in suffering. This does not mean you accept harm. It means you understand that harm often grows from ignorance, fear, and pain. When you understand that, your heart can stay open while your wisdom sets boundaries. Mira paused the video and thought about her own life. She had a person in her past she called an enemy. When she pictured them, her stomach tightened. She had been feeding that tightness for years. She realized that feeding it had not made her safer. It had made her smaller. History suddenly felt personal. Mira returned to the talk. The teacher described how, as Buddhism spread and evolved, compassion meditation took on new expressions. In some streams, compassion was emphasized through stories of the Buddha's life, through teachings on patience and non-harm, through the discipline of right speech and right action. In others, compassion became the center of an entire vow. The Bodhisattva vow, the commitment to awaken for the benefit of others. Mira had heard the word Bodhisattva and imagined it belonged to saints, but the teacher framed it differently. The Bodhisattva ideal is a radical response to the fact that suffering is interconnected. If you awaken only for yourself, you may still be trapped by self-centered fear. But if you cultivate a heart that includes others, your awakening becomes deeper, because it challenges the boundaries of ego. Mira understood this in a quiet way. When she was stuck in depression, she was stuck in herself, not in a selfish way, but in a narrow way. Her mind felt like a small room. When she helped someone, even a little, the room got bigger. Not because she forgot her pain, but because she stopped being imprisoned by it. Compassion widened the inner world. So the historical development was not just philosophical. It was psychological truth discovered repeatedly. Then came another chapter in the story. the rise of specific compassion figures and symbols. The teacher spoke of the Bodhisattva of compassion known by many names across cultures, Avalokiteshvara in some traditions, Chenrezig in Tibetan contexts, Kuan Yin in Chinese-influenced cultures. Mira did not need to adopt a specific religious identity to understand what this symbol represented. It represented the compassionate response as a stable presence, a reminder that compassion can be embodied, not only imagined. Mira noticed something important. When the mind is overwhelmed, it is hard to generate compassion from scratch. Symbols can help because they provide a template. You imagine compassion as something that exists, something you can lean toward. It is like learning a dance by watching someone who knows it well. The symbol teaches your nervous system what the posture feels like. Mira had experienced this with music. When she listened to a tender chant, her breath softened. The chant did not fix her life, but it changed her state. The state changed her choices. That is karma. The teacher then described how compassion practice in later traditions developed methods that were more explicit about transforming suffering. One method that Mira found striking was the idea of exchanging self and other, and practices like Tun Glen in Tibetan contexts, where one imagines breathing in suffering and breathing out relief. Mira felt alarm at first. Why would anyone breathe in suffering? It sounded dangerous. But the teacher explained that these practices are not about literally absorbing other people's pain until you collapse. They are training the mind to reverse the reflex of avoidance. The ordinary mind sees suffering and runs away or hardens. The compassion-trained mind sees suffering and stays present, offering care. The imagery of breathing in undoubt is a way to train courage and openness. It is done gently, not as a performance. Mira realized that she had been doing the opposite of Tun Glen most of her life. She breathed in anxiety and breathed out nothing. She held it. She tightened. She feared it. No wonder she felt tired. The history of compassion meditation was starting to look like a record of people discovering one truth again and again. The heart becomes strong through training, not through hardness. As Mira continued learning, she noticed another thread. The development of compassion meditation was always tied to ethics. Compassion without ethics can become sentimental. Ethics without compassion can become rigid. Many Buddhist teachings emphasize non-harm, truthful speech, right livelihood, and mindful consumption. Mira began to see why. Compassion is not only what you feel in meditation. It is what you repeatedly choose when you speak, spend, post, argue, work, and rest. History was showing Mira that compassion practice was never meant to be confined to a cushion. It was meant to shape a life. Then something happened that made all of this feel urgent. Mira had a conflict at work. A co-worker blamed Mira for a mistake. The co-worker did it publicly, in a meeting, with a tone that felt humiliating. Mira felt heat flood her body. The old reflex rose instantly. Attack back, embarrass them, prove them wrong, destroy their credibility. Mira could already feel the pleasure of revenge forming in the mind. It felt powerful. Then Mira remembered a sentence from the history talk. Hatred feels powerful, but it poisons the one who holds it. Compassion is not weakness. Compassion is protection. Mira took one breath. Just one. She felt the jaw unclench slightly. She did not become sweet. She became clearer. She responded with calm facts. And she did not insult. She said what was true. And she asked to discuss the process privately after the meeting. The co-worker looked surprised. The meeting moved on. Afterward, Mira felt shaky. The desire for revenge still existed, but she felt another feeling beneath it. Dignity. Dignity is a fruit of compassion with wisdom. Mira had protected herself without becoming cruel. Later that night, Mira sat and practiced compassion meditation. This time, it did not feel like a wellness routine. It felt like training for real life. Mira began with herself. May I be calm. May I be kind. May I be wise. Mira noticed how hard it was to wish herself well when she felt humiliated. The inner critic wanted to attack her too. You should have handled it better. You looked weak. You should have destroyed them. Mira saw the critic as another form of violence. The critic was trying to protect her through harshness. But harshness created more suffering. Mira placed a hand on her chest and said inwardly, I see you. I am here. I can learn without hating myself. The chest softened. Not completely, but enough. Then Mira moved to compassion for the co-worker. And this felt almost impossible. So she used the historical wisdom she had learned. She did not start by forcing love. She started by recognizing suffering under harmful behavior. A person who publicly blames others is often afraid. Afraid of looking incompetent. Afraid of losing status. Afraid of being punished. Fear makes people cruel. Mira did not excuse the behavior. She still planned to set boundaries. But she could see the human cause under it. That reduced hatred slightly. Mira whispered, May you be free from the fear that makes you harmful. That phrase felt more honest than pretending everything was fine. As Mira practiced, she felt something shift. Not forgiveness as a sudden event, but a loosening. The co-worker no longer lived inside her like a toxin. Mira could breathe again. This is when Mira truly understood why compassion meditation survived for centuries. It works on the problem that never stops appearing. The mind turning pain into poison. The next day Mira met with the co-worker privately. Mira spoke calmly and clearly. She named what happened. She said it was not acceptable. She asked for accountability. She did not insult. The co-worker apologized awkwardly. The relationship did not become perfect, but the conflict did not become war. Mira walked away feeling stable. Mira realized compassion practice does not remove conflict from life. It changes how conflict shapes you. That is destiny. Mira continued studying the history, and the teacher described how compassion meditation also evolved through the integration of wisdom teachings like impermanence and emptiness. Mira had always been confused by these concepts. They sounded abstract, but now the teacher explained them in a way that made compassion feel more possible. Impermanence means emotions change. If you remember that, you stop treating anger as a permanent identity. You stop saying, I am an angry person. You start saying, anger is here. That small shift gives space. Space gives choice. Choice is freedom. Emptiness means people and situations are not fixed, solid entities. The mind loves to freeze people into labels. Enemy, idiot, monster, savior. When you freeze them, hatred or clinging becomes easy. When you see that each person is a flow of causes and conditions, compassion becomes more possible. Because you stop treating them as a permanent object of your hate. You still set boundaries. You still protect yourself. But you do not imprison your heart. Mira realized that wisdom teachings were not separate from compassion. They are fuel for compassion. Without wisdom, compassion can become fragile. With wisdom, compassion becomes steady. In history, these teachings developed alongside each other because practitioners discovered that a heart needs both softness and clarity. A warm heart and a clear spine. Mira also learned that different traditions emphasize different doors into compassion. Some emphasized phrase-based loving kindness. Some emphasized visualization of compassionate figures. Some emphasized chanting and mantra. Some emphasized analytical reflection on interdependence. Some emphasized direct contemplation of suffering and the wish to relieve it. The diversity was not a contradiction. It was adaptation. Different minds need different doors. Mira felt grateful because her mind did not always respond to phrases. Sometimes sound worked better. Sometimes hand on chest worked better. Sometimes simply remembering that suffering is universal worked better. History gave her permission to be flexible without feeling like she was doing it wrong. As Mira practiced over months, she began to experience compassion not only as a moral quality but as a form of inner strength. When she felt anxious, she could place a hand on her chest and soften. When she felt lonely, she could offer kindness to the lonely part instead of running. When she felt jealousy, she could see the fear under it and respond with care. When she felt anger, she could feel it without letting it command her speech. None of this made her life perfect, but it made her life more workable. Workable is a beautiful word in spiritual practice. Workable means you can live, you can learn, you can love, you can fail and repair, you can stay human. Mira began to understand that compassion meditation is a practice of refusing to dehumanize. First, you refuse to dehumanize yourself. Then you refuse to dehumanize others. When you refuse to dehumanize, the world becomes less toxic inside your mind. And that changes everything. There is a reason the historical stream kept returning to compassion figures and compassion vows. They are reminders that awakening is not only a private escape. It is the transformation of how you relate to all beings. Even if you do not frame it religiously, the psychological truth remains. A mind consumed by hatred suffers. A mind trained in compassion suffers less, and it causes less suffering. Now I want to speak to you directly, because you might be listening and thinking, history is interesting, but my life is happening now. That is true. And the real gift of this history is that it offers you a broader sense of what you are doing when you practice. When you sit and repeat, may I be safe, may I be calm, may I be kind, you are participating in a very old training of attention. When you try to include a difficult person in your circle of goodwill without approving their harm, you are practicing a very old form of courageous clarity. When you listen compassionately instead of rushing to fix, you are practicing a very old medicine for the human nervous system. When you set a boundary without cruelty, you are practicing ethics as compassion in advance. When you repair after you fail, you are practicing a very old path of humility. You do not need to carry the whole history in your head. You only need to carry the essence in your breath. The essence is this: do not abandon the heart. If you want a simple way to bring this whole history into 1 minute, try this. Breathe in and recognize. Suffering exists. Breathe out and respond. May compassion arise. Breathe in and recognize. My mind can harden. Breathe out and respond. May my heart stay human. Breathe in and recognize. I will fail sometimes. Breathe out and respond. May I repair with kindness. That is compassion meditation in living form. Mira continued her practice, and one day she noticed something that felt like quiet awakening. She was walking in a crowded street, people rushing, faces tense, someone bumping into her without apology. The old Mira would have flared, judged, and carried bitterness. This time, she felt irritation rise, and then she felt a softening, almost automatic. She saw a tired city. She saw tired people. She felt her own tiredness too. She whispered inwardly, may we be safe. May we be calm. May we be kind. The irritation passed faster. This is not small. This is a shift in karma. The old habit creates long suffering from one small bump. The new habit allows the mind to move on. Moving on is freedom. Freedom changes destiny because it changes what you carry into your next conversation, your next decision, your next sleep. As we come to the end, I want to share something that might help you feel resonance rather than pressure. Compassion meditation is hard sometimes because it goes against a survival habit. The survival habit says, harden to protect yourself, attack to stay safe, shame yourself to improve, control others to avoid pain. These habits are understandable. They are also expensive. They cost peace. Compassion meditation offers a different survival strategy, one rooted in wisdom. Be present. See clearly. Offer kindness. Set boundaries. Repair. It is not naive. It is brave. I have seen people change their lives through this practice in very ordinary ways. A person who used to explode learned to pause and breathe and speak calmly. A person who hated themselves learned to treat their inner pain with kindness and became more courageous. A person who felt burned out learned the difference between empathy and compassion and became steady. A person who carried resentment for years learned to wish for the causes of harm to dissolve and felt their chest loosen for the first time in a long time. None of these changes were instant. They were made of repetition. Repetition is the bridge between history and your life. Repetition is how the past becomes a living stream inside you. Repetition is how karma changes. Repetition is how destiny softens and turns. Thank you for staying with me through this long journey. If this story resonated, share your experience in the comments. Tell me which doorway into compassion works best for you. Phrases, breath, visualization, chanting, or simply remembering suffering under behavior. And if you want more long-form Buddhist-inspired stories and practices, please subscribe, like the video, and support the channel in whatever way is possible for you. Until next time, keep breathing, keep practicing, and keep choosing the kindest next step.